All right, looks like we're live. Hey, everybody out there, welcome to the 5th Wednesday of the month. We don't get too many of these, but when we do, the UL Firefighter Safety Research Institute gets to take over the Humpday Hangout and talk about research, talk about practice, talk about implementing, and that's what we've got a great lineup to do today. So we're going to spend the next hour talking with members of the UL FSRI advisory board that have joined us, and we'll introduce them in a second. But if you want to be a part of the conversation, you've got a question to ask this group, or something's been eating away at you that you want to talk about that has to do with research or implementing tactics, whatever the case is, get on Twitter, #FETalk, shoot that across. We're keeping an eye on that, and we'll be able to get that question in front of our friends here. So I'm Steve Kerber. I'm the director of the UL Firefighter Safety Research Institute. I've got the honor of leading a team that's dedicated to increasing the knowledge of the fire service through research. And who I have with me today is essentially a big chunk of our advisory board that does exactly what it says. I mean, they guide us, they keep us connected to the fire service. They're constantly paying attention to what's going on out there in the world and what matters to the fire service, and helping us choose our research studies, and really supplementing our reach and making it so that we can get the best stuff out to the fire service we can in the most effective way. One of those is taking advantage of our partnership with Fire Engineering in Penwell, who gives us this platform to be able to reach their audience. And hopefully everyone finds this useful. So let's go across the bottom here, starting with Captain Ceriello. Who are you?
Captain John Ceriello. I am a captain with the New York City Fire Department, currently working in the beautiful borough of Brooklyn.
Very nice. Follow it up with George.
How you doing? I'm George Healy. I'm a deputy chief in the FDNY. Just a little bit of breaking news with the UL Firefighter Research Institute board. As you can see from his picture, John is going through helicopter pilot training. So, he was hoping to be certified before, the big storm, so he could go down and help out in Texas. But maybe for next hurricane season, John. But good luck with your instruction there. I know you'll do just fine earning your wings.
Thank you, Chief.
George, you in your daughter's bedroom? Where are you at?
As a matter of fact, and congratulations to Steve Kerber. He just became the father of a beautiful bouncing baby boy. He's only got to do it 2 more times to catch up to the good Chief Healy, but we're hoping that you're going to stay in the fight and welcome some more beautiful kids into the Kerber household.
Thanks, Chief. Very, very kind. Pete.
You jump all the way to me? I'm Pete Van Dorpe. I'm the fire chief in the Lake in the Hills, Algonquin-Lake in the Hills Fire Protection District. Spent part of my former life with the Chicago Fire Department. Right now we're doing the Okefenokee. Is that it, George? Okefenokee. Keeping people safe out here in the burbs.
I still can't get used to you not having a mustache. Who is this guy?
Yeah, I know.
Very confusing.
I'm starting the 3rd phase of my life. You guys buy a sports car. I shaved off the stash.
Sean Decrane.
Oh, hey guys. Sean Decrane recently retired after almost 26 years in the Cleveland Fire Department. Left one public safety organization for another, and came on board at UL, but also represented the IFF for 11 years in the building codes and standards. And why Steve has his kids moving in, mine are moving out. So that's not a bad thing. And a shout out to also Robin Zavodik, whose wife Christy is shortly expecting any day now.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on here at FSRI between myself, Robin, and Josh with one on the way. It's I guess it's breeding time.
Well, we know when the research project ended.
Sean Gray.
Hey, everyone. Sean Gray. I'm a lieutenant in Cobb County, Georgia, and I'm currently assigned to the training division and I have 10 years to go before I can retire. So I'm the young Sean.
Better be more than 10 years. You're way too young for that talk. All right. Well, we've got our guests from all different fire department backgrounds. Let's start with John, so George can beat him up after the fact. But John, let's talk about implementing the research as it pertains to FDNY. I mean, we clearly have done some research projects together on Governor's Island multiple times. You've served roles in many times with special operations and other where you get to have interesting conversations with your colleagues. Talk about all that. Talk about from the official department level all the way down to hitting the individuals in the street.
Well, obviously, you're correct. We've been involved in the research for quite a few years now. I guess it started in '06. Culminating back then with the wind impacted fire study and research on Governor's Island, where we brought a bunch of tools into the mix to combat what we were seeing as a change in how wind affects a fire in a residential or a commercial high-rise building. And those tools were, again, researched on Governor's Island and proven to be appropriate and good for the circumstance. And if we were to go now and look back on, let's say, the last 10 years, we've probably implemented a wind control device upwards of over 30 different fires. Many of them, after speaking with the individuals on the inside, said, no, it changed conditions for the better very rapidly. We also researched how to get water on fires at those upper levels, which has only been used at one particular fire. However, it's been in position a number of different times to be utilized if the incident commander saw fit. And obviously, with the recent fires we've seen around in high-rise buildings around the world, but in particular in Honolulu, that piece of equipment that was vetted by us and researched by us, which certainly could have assisted them in getting some water on that particular fire. So we know all that's worked quite well. That wind impacted led into the ventilation study, and there we're seeing just over the last, say, year or so, we've had a number of different times where what we learned on Governor's Island was implemented on the fire ground. In fact, just the other day, on the 28th of this month, we had a fire that's on YouTube. I'm actually watching it off to my left right now. It's a pretty long video, but they implemented an exterior stream and had positive results inside the building. The challenge for us, though, still is we have certain pockets of individuals who either have never seen the research or are choosing not to use the research. Again, but as a whole, I think we've grown in leaps and bounds. Everyone has to remember we're a very large fire department. In fact, each borough would be considered a very large fire department. And yet we are seeing some very positive effects from the research. However, the job is still not done. We're still pushing forward on that.
Absolutely. Well, build on that, George. I mean, you sit in the FDNY at a different level. I mean, at the staff chief level. What are the conversations? And I mean, we're talking over a decade now, right? So it's
yeah, absolutely. I mean, like John said, and really the reason for this was the fact that we were seeing that injuries were up and critical burn injuries were up, and some of our former commissioners and former leaders of my department said, we really have a moral obligation as the leaders of the FDNY to figure this out and protect our people. Firefighting is still a very dangerous occupation. I don't think it's getting less dangerous. As we've seen, as John said, some of these significant high-rise fires, these exterior combustible wall assemblies that have become a challenge and have turned tragic in other places in the world. These things are still going to continue to challenge the fire service. We're going to have to be innovative. We're going to have to be engaged. And we're going to have to continue this partnership with the engineers who can really answer our questions. There are still some people who feel that the engineering community is really navigating this ship and steering it in certain directions. And I know from my involvement, which I've been extremely blessed to be with you folks from ground floor, basically. This is the fire service working with, in conjunction with the engineers, to say, listen, we've got these problems. And yeah, we've got the experience, we've got the know-how, we've got the boots on the ground. But as the great Ray Orozco from the city of Chicago said, you know, science needs to meet the streets. And I know in my department, we still have had some fires that have challenged us. But I'm very thankful to say that fire-related deaths are down in the general population in New York City. And, you know, firefighter fatalities in New York City, which used to occur on a yearly, if not monthly basis, are becoming fewer and farther in between. And that's our motivation. That's what keeps me engaged.
How about you, Pete? Spent an entire career in the Chicago Fire Department and now have a slightly different view. I mean, you've gone from five people on a rig and hydrants every 5 feet to 3 people on a rig if you're lucky. And
yeah, we're waiting for it to rain. Yeah,
exactly.
It's you know, the big advantage with a smaller department is you can touch everybody. You know, if especially when you get to be chief, and even when I came out here, I came out as assistant chief. But you still have the ability. You decide to make an operational change, you can reach everybody immediately and implement that operational change. There's still the learning curve and all that kind of stuff. But when you're in a large department, Chicago, certainly FDNY, Cleveland, any of these larger urban departments, implementing change gets much more difficult because you got to reach more people. You have the continuity of the message, and so you just have to have a whole lot more patience in those organizations, because they're not going to change that fast, and they shouldn't change that fast. They're just not capable of it, for one thing. So you can't expect it to happen all that quick. But it's been interesting to come out here where if I want something done a different way, it's done a different way, and so that's a lot of fun. You know, after banging your head, you feel like you're banging a head against the wall in a large organization. I mean, I was chief of training when I left Chicago, and we were trying to implement a lot of this stuff, and we did implement a lot of this stuff, but implementing it and actually getting it to become part of the daily routine are two very different things. George and John can attest to that, and any of us can, actually. So it's been fun coming out here where you can see the impact faster. You know, you can see the change implemented and happen fast, and you get your feedback faster, too. And it's much more consistent. So I'm having a ball.
So give me an example of you've moved where Algonquin-Lake in the Hills, something that you've implemented or something that you've changed as a result of the research that you've seen a positive impact.
So the easiest one would be, and the one that everybody likes to argue over, is the whole exterior stream stuff. So in Chicago, actually, that's old news, because we've been using quick water in Chicago for 30 years when appropriate. And the research, I get to leverage that a lot, because the research is substantiating what Chicago implemented in 1983, which is pull up on the scene and when appropriate, hit it with the deck gun, knock it back a little bit, lead out your crossway, go in and put the rest of the fire out. When I came out here, that was still, this is an oversimplification, but they were still, you know, trying to do what they thought was the big city tactic, which was always going in and getting it. And so say, no, guys, I'm giving you permission to do it a different way. I'm not telling you you have to. I'm just giving you permission. You don't always have to do it this one way. Where appropriate, you can use that exterior stream. You can knock the fire back. You can redeploy into the interior and put out the rest of the fire. And I can make that happen immediately. So, you know, and I've always looked at it that way. It's about giving permission. It's not about saying you have to do things different. It's giving you permission to do things different. And to me, that's been the implementation strategy, both in the city and in the suburbs.
Makes a lot of sense.
Hey, Steve.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, building off what Pete said, and I'd like you to expand a little bit. When we just had our meeting, we were talking about how now there's a platform for departments to utilize the UL firefighter research on the internet, and also track the learning, right, that their members are partaking in through the various research studies. Can you expand on that a little bit, perhaps?
Sure, absolutely. We actually just launched a new website a week or two ago now, that we've been working on for a long time, trying to make the information easier to get to, make it easier to follow. We've always been doing things project by project, and now we've got multiple projects going at the same time. We've got many more partnerships with the International Society of Fire Service Instructors, Illinois Fire Service Institute, NFFF, all kinds of other departments that have led to not full-fledged 3-year projects, but things that we want to communicate, and we want people to be able to go back and find a lot easier, especially if we're talking about getting videos or content for PowerPoints that people want to use and things along those lines. We want to make it easy for you if that's what you're going to do. Another big advancement is one that we're finishing up right now. We've always made our online training programs free. I think that's very important. We also made them very easily to get into and move around in without having to go through a bunch of login screens and having to follow a certain path through the course and all of that. We want it to be able to be used for a 30-minute drill, or we want it to be able to use for, if you want to dig into the data for 5 hours and come to your own conclusions, we want people to be able to do that as well, for complete transparency. Also, people have different interests in the information, and if they want to use that data to support their point or make a change in their department, then that's great. We're adding another layer by getting our own learning management system, leveraging tools available at UL to, again, keep it freely available, make it so the fire service can use it for free. But we also had a huge demand for, how do I prove that I took this online course? How do I prove that I can use it for continuing education and stuff like that? And we never wanted to get into the business of having people pay to print certificates or get Con Ed. Well, we finally got enough support within our group and enough budget from UL to be able to subsidize it and pay for it. But we're going to add the capability where every person can log in, every person can take whatever courses they want, they can pass a short quiz, they can print a certificate of completion, and if that's good enough for your department, then that's great. There's another component to that is if your chief wants to go in and you've got to select your department as you get into the LMS, and we've got, I think, about 15,000 departments loaded into the system. You go in there, you identify yourself as being a member of the Algonquin-Lake and the Hills Fire Protection District. And then Pete, as the chief, or whoever he provides permission in there, can get administrator access and essentially validate all of the members of that department that have taken any of the courses and passed the quizzes. So that'll be coming out, probably finished within the next month, where that added capability will be there. And as we add online training programs, you'll be able to get credit for them, or people will be able to use our programs as part of whatever certification that they need to satisfy, depending on, I mean, there's, the fire service is no means uniform across the board. I mean, there's states that require no Con Ed, there's some states that require some, there's some departments that require a ton, and then there's some that require nothing. It's across the board. So we wanted to provide a flexible system that allows our online training programs that we put a lot of effort into making sure that they're good to be usable and people to get credit for it. So that's coming. And hopefully people find that useful, and we'll continue to take feedback and adapt it as needed. All right, let's keep going. So Sean Decrane, what did Cleveland do?
Well, Ohio, we were kind of lucky in a sense that Ohio is one of those states that requires Con Ed every year, very similar to EMT training. Why do they keep throwing the very handsome John Ceriello up on the screen when the rest of us are talking? Have you noticed that? But
it's very distracting. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, give us the eye candy. But so in Cleveland, to meet the required 18 hours, we provide the Con Ed, but also for members who maybe weren't getting Con Ed consistently, we start, or to ensure that our members got the required Con Ed, we instituted a quarterly online Con Ed program, both for EMT and for firefighting. So, which means that we could take all 800, 900 members and direct them to the Con Ed that we wanted online each quarter. So we started implementing access to the UL programs, online programs. And as what you were referencing just a little bit ago, that wasn't available at the time. So we had to create our own test or quizzes that the member, we'd provide the link to the UL site, they'd go look at the program, then come back to our site with their own password and take a competency test to demonstrate that they completed the program. We did that continuously every time one of the programs became available, but we also held officer roll calls every month. And periodically we'd introduce a concept for a 30 to 45-minute class, whether it was fire behavior, lightweight building construction, ventilation, just a topic for them to consider. As we progressed a little bit further, we felt it was time to revise our SOPs. And very similar to what Pete was saying, I think our SOPs were very similar to many other departments. You shall do this. You shall do this. On a residential fire, you shall go through the front door. Not giving any considerations to what if there's a 30-mile-an-hour wind coming right in your face? Do you still want that company to go through the front door? So as we rewrote our SOPs, we put our tactical considerations into the front and our tactical objectives into the front of the SOP, and then throughout started saying our officers, our firefighters needed to consider these tactical objectives and their considerations and make decisions based on the conditions on the fire ground. We weren't telling them this is how you have to operate. The research, no one that I know of involved in the research is saying that. What the research has given us are options to use on the fire ground based on the conditions that are in front of us. When we rolled out the SOP, we rolled out an officer roll call, which we held over 3 shifts, bringing all of our officers down. It was so well received that the officers that attended recommended we bring all officers down. So we added a second week, which then the officer corps came back and said, you know what, everybody should have this. So we videotaped it and made it part of our quarterly Con Ed. So every member in the division went through the training of the implementation of the new SOP, utilizing the research and tactical considerations on the fire ground. Again, giving our members options. And interestingly, I mean, Pete would know this, seeing as how long ago he got on, but many of our officers were saying, hey, this isn't new. This is the way we operated for years. And exactly, we're going back to our basics of firefighting. Communicating on the fire ground, coordinating our efforts, controlling our resources, and controlling air to the fire. Those were our basics. And so I think we really had a solid buy-in from our group. I hear from officers still how they're implementing it and the success stories.
Oh, that's great. I mean, the instead of narrowing choices, you expand choices and expect your people to think and react to what they see in front of them, and keep the pieces from the research in the back of your head and implement them as needed. I think that's pretty much how we intend all of this to go, which is great.
Yeah, just one quick thing. I think it's important to also that it needs reinforcement. We need exposure to it constantly, or we can get into bad habits again. We need to keep this information fresh. And that's the importance of having it online and freely accessible. And I think it's great.
Outstanding. Young Sean, Cobb County is no small department, and I've had the pleasure to go down there and teach some classes and look at what your chief intends to happen with the research. Give us a little synopsis on what's going on down there.
Yeah, so pretty similar to Cleveland. We've done the exact same thing, done all the learning modules that UL FSRI has put out. All of our firefighters have been through them all, so they're fairly well educated on exactly what's going on with UL. Of course, had you and Dan come in, and I think the most important thing was that small day after you guys spoke with the battalion chiefs, more of an intimate setting and really getting at that level, because those are the guys that are kind of running the fire grounds, or they may not be making the initial tactical decisions, but they're the ones that are making sure that things happen and are okay with exterior streams. And I know now one of the things we're doing a lot of is door control. It's getting called out on the radio, things like that. So yeah, you guys coming and speaking was huge for us, and people are starting to listen. Our latest venture is probably the cancer stuff. Our cancer stuff is going kind of crazy, and our 2 district chiefs are very involved in it, and they're having us do a cancer prevention policy, and we're listening to what Gavin Horn and Denise Smith and Kenny Fenn have done, and of course UL with it. So we're trying to implement some of that stuff just within the next few weeks. Hopefully by October 1st, we'll have something out and going in our department.
Yeah, that's been a phenomenal partnership with NIOSH and IFSI, where, I mean, they're able to do things that we're not able to do, and I think that we can do what they can't do, but together it's been unbelievable to try and. It's such a complex problem, the cancer in the fire service, and trying to validate a lot of what seems to be common sense things, like the difference between not dry brushing your gear or wet deconning your gear or having a second set of gear, or all of those things, putting gear in apparatus cabs or in chief's vehicles and stuff like that, where it's anecdotally, it sounds like it makes sense. We want to try and put the science behind it so that the decisions that you are making you can start from common sense stuff and then validate, because again, these things take time. So it's very difficult to say, oh, we're going to do a study, we're going to do a set of burns, and then we'll have you the answers the next day. That's just not how it works. Especially with a lot of that stuff, we're sending stuff out to labs that take 6 months to get all of the tests done with it. We're doing a PPE cleaning study now, where Gavin and his team just finished putting sets of gear through 40 fire exposures and cleaning cycles. And that gear looks nothing like it did when it started, as you can imagine. And then we're taking those samples after 20 fires, after 10 fires, 20 fires, 40 fires, and sending it down to our materials testing lab in North Carolina. And they're looking at how does it continue to perform after it has those exposures. So as it gets beat around in the extractor and hung in the dryer and wet, dry, exposed, not exposed. We also look at a bunch of different hoods. I mean, a lot of companies have jumped out and said, you know what, hey, we want to keep your neck and your head area from getting contaminated because that's extremely important. And they implemented some stuff, and we're seeing that some of it works well, some of it might not, some of it might need some revisions. But we're learning some things, and we hope to be able to get that stuff out soon. But again, we can't get it out until we make sure the science is sound and that the results are repeatable over and over and over again. But a lot of that stuff's coming soon. I think by the end of the year, you're going to see a lot more information out on those topics, so that again, it's not tactics on the fire ground. It's taking care of your people and holistically looking at their exposure and trying to cut that exposure down where it makes sense across their career. So you get a long retirement, and we're not having folks battling cancer while on the job or shortly after retirement. That's not a good thing. So we're working along those lines, but it's hard to slow people down and say, I mean, I get emails every day. What's the answer? What's the answer? I wish I could share, but you gotta pump the brakes and look at the science.
We should give a quick shout out to the Boston Fire Department, because I believe they've been on really ahead of the curve on this whole thing. And some of the videos that they put out that were extremely heartfelt, but also backed up by the commissioner of the fire department, by the unions representing the members of the Boston Fire Department. They were all and the families all together putting these videos out that I thought had a huge impact. I was actually using that video for my drill period in a number of firehouses where I've been working. I would just say, hey guys, come on in and take a look at this, and just let it play. I wouldn't say a word, and then just ask them what they think. And there weren't many that were like, at least take pause about how we do business. And I know for our department, we are unfortunately burying an awful lot of firefighters over the last couple of years. and you just can't stick your head in the sand anymore. I know we're not. We're actually working on it. Probably very similar to what Sean's doing, very similar to what Boston's doing. We're just still in the process of putting it all together, but it's coming. There's no doubt about it. You know, John, just to reinforce that point, when we were down at Illinois, we had that panel discussion. And one of the things Pat Morrison from the IFF brought up, that when they posted the names to the IFF Memorial in Colorado Springs, 60% of them were job-related cancers. And those, you know, and that's a tough mark to get too, because you have to be recognized by the state, but you have to be recognized as job-related. So that number likely is much higher. But that's a telling number, and it should make all of our members take a step back and look up, because no member is safe from that.
I think if we, you know, spin this back a little bit to implementation, one of the things that I find myself trying to do a lot is some parts of this research has become controversial or perceived as controversial, but some of it isn't. I think learning more about our cancer exposures is not controversial. So to those departments, those training officers, those chief officers, they're looking for a means to help implement the research. Go to the parts of this research that don't involve the internet controversy and begin there. Let your guys see what these groups are doing for us as a service in the areas of cancer. The whole Close Your Door campaign and what that can do for civilians, and all these other things that you know, the work that NIST has done on the SCBA face pieces, the fast alarm devices, and all that kind of stuff. So much of the fire service doesn't know that this work is out there, and there's no controversy. There's no tactical controversy over any of this stuff. And getting guys familiar with that, I think, helps facilitate a deeper understanding or a more open mind to the rest of it when the time comes for that.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how frustrating it gets when you hear feedback like, well, we don't believe in the research because of the exterior stream controversy. And it's like, whoa, why don't you look at the other 20 studies that we've done? Look at the other 100 studies that our colleagues have done in all of the other organizations that are doing research with the fire service to help you out. Don't, like Pete said, if you're hung up on one, don't dismiss all because you're hung up on the one.
We don't want anybody to do anything because we said so or because we did a project. We want understanding, right? And so when you come to an understanding, you won't need me to advocate for adoption. You'll do it yourself. So if you're not ready for that piece of it, for whatever reason, go on to something else. There's all kinds of stuff out there that you can make use of that I bet you are ready for. You know? So have at it.
I recently had a discussion with a hired officer from my own department, and he brought up 2 points. And usually within about 15 to 20 minutes of discussing any of these controversial issues, you can them a little things that maybe aren't so apparent initially, but once it's explained, they get it. For instance, this whole notion, and Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this whole notion of the exterior stream came out of, I believe that I remember with the research, was the high-rise nozzles. When we first started playing around with high-rise nozzles, I would have bet dollars to donuts that when we flowed that water in the window, we were going to see these massive fireballs in the hallway downstream, either in Chicago or we didn't do it in Chicago, but at Governor's Island, and we didn't see it. And that kind of led to, well, if we're not seeing it on a wind-impacted fire, I wonder what happens on a regular fire. And that's what led us down that road. It wasn't something we were looking to do from the very beginning. It just kind of starts to flow out of the research. And we've seen that in a number of different issues, that one research leads to another and leads to another. And all of that collectively becomes our foundation or better understanding of everything. The other thing that he mentioned to me that, again, just blows me away is, and Sean mentioned the word consideration. There's nowhere, and I'm going to have lunch with this gentleman shortly, and I asked him to bring any information he has so that he can make his case. But there's nowhere that an engineer is telling firefighters how to fight a fire. In fact, it's the opposite. The more knowledge we have, the better chance we can think through a problem by having more data or information to make our decisions on a fire ground. So it's actually leading to a smarter thinking firefighter, as opposed to, again, what Sean mentioned, how our SOPs were, you have this, do this, you have this, do this. No, with the more information, I know me personally, I'm making better decisions on the fire ground. And that's, again, something that contradicts those that don't truly understand what's going on and haven't taken the time to understand what's going on.
I guess, John, personally, I agree with you. We have such a diverse membership that, of course, there are going to be differences of opinions and different approaches to tactics, and that's fine. That's what causes discussions, and that's what causes us to learn from each other. But I wish people would actually go through the data before they start throwing arrows at it and saying, I don't trust it, because this intuitively doesn't make sense to me. Go through it and have a discussion with me, and let's discuss it through before you just say naysay, because it almost seems to me like they're taking a shot at the credibility of the researchers and the validity of the science without even really looking at it. And I guess that kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way, but I'm still open to those discussions.
Yeah, when you live these topics, it's amazing the different things that you come across when it comes to that. And I mean, I think back when Pete invited us to do a class at all of the promoted captains and battalion chiefs in Chicago. So when he brought them down to the academy to put them through their training, he'd bring us in for a day, and we'd just kind of share with them the latest and greatest. And I mean, I can think just about every single one of those classes with about, let's say, 30, 40 new promoted folks in it, they would be at each other's throats wanting to fight each other about tactics that worked in one battalion of Chicago, but clearly would not work in another battalion of Chicago. And I had this fire and I had that fire, and they're at each other's throats of like, it got to the point where it had nothing to do with anything that I was talking about. And they're at each other talking about it works, it doesn't work, it works here, it doesn't work there. And I'm sitting there just thinking, it's like, this is exactly why we're doing what we're doing. Is so I can provide information to both of those guys to have an intelligent conversation instead of screaming opinion at each other to the point where they're cursing each other's mothers and everything else and swearing that one's a better fireman than the other. And it's just those conversations can be supported by the research and by the information so that they become intelligent conversations where people are having conversations about the same context. And I think that that's where we get into a lot of trouble with the implementation, is that I've got a 2-story single family in a small community in my head, and you've got a 6-story H-type in your head, and we're arguing about flow path, and we're talking about two totally different things on the implementation end. However, the science end is exactly the same. So if we can step back and capture the fire dynamics piece, then we can talk about both of those types of structures and staffing and timing and all that other stuff to figure out what the best approach is based on what you see. So it's just one of those stories that came to mind. It's like, man, these guys, I could leave right now and I provided value by letting them talk this out.
Sometimes it's a matter of your built environment. And as Steve pointed out, that doesn't change the science, but it can drastically change the implementation or the appropriateness of it. There's some, we've been using in Chicago quick water for decades. Well, there's some battalions where, we never do that. Well, if you look in their built environment, you start to understand why. It's just structurally not very effective choice more often than not. There's other battalions where it makes intuitive sense virtually all the time. So, guys can get on two sides of a discussion like that, and they're really talking, they're not open to other people's reality. And that's part of where all of this work helps bridge all that. It's looking for the commonalities, looking for the things that are consistent from incident to incident, and maximizing your ability to address that.
And George, you have something to add?
No, I was just going to build off what John said. That initial testing that we did with NIST at the time, looking at fans, I think we all went out to Toledo, Ohio saying, what are we going to do with fans? We had a New York City Fire Department. And then being exposed to yourself and Dan and starting to learn from your knowledge base about fires, and starting to kind of realize ourselves, I'm a professional firefighter, and there are terms that you and Dan are using, and quite frankly, we weren't that well versed in those terms. And what is flow path and what is heat release rate? And that initial series of burns in Chicago on State Street back in December of '06. We started learning more about heat and pressure and flows, and then going out to Governor's Island. We weren't really optimistic that high-rise nozzle was going to perform as well as it did. And the logical question arose from us as the fire service, well, if it works so good here, where can we adapt this? How can we make this better? And then when we started getting into and looking closer at ventilation, I remember the vertical ventilation studies. And I had seasoned New York City firefighters tell me, you cut right over the fire, you pull it, you coordinate it with the advancement of the hose line, the bad stuff is going to come out, it's not going to flow back towards the door. And that's not really what we saw in the testing. We saw that it was overwhelming the vent, fire was still moving back to those other horizontal openings. And none of us, as Sean mentioned before, has ever said, this is how you have to fight your fire. What we talk about is these tactical considerations. And what's more important is the firefighters' understanding. And one quick message, somebody had relayed this story to John and myself, where they went in and they didn't 100% do door control the way we expected, and then they allowed vertical ventilation from a bulkhead. But the real key point to the story was the captain had seen the research, he was educated, and when that fire came out of the kitchen and rolled over his head and was putting him and his crew in a precarious situation, he knew the reason why that was occurring was he created a vertical vent. He opened up a flow path for the fire to come over his head and flow back to that opening. He called his roof firefighter on the handy-talkie, said, shut the bulkhead door. And in this captain's own words, he said, it was like he put the genie back in the bottle. The fire stopped growing over his head. It was confined to the kitchen again. They retreated. They controlled the door. They got a hose line in place. They went in and put the fire out. Everybody was safe. Hey, that's the end goal. That makes us satisfied. And you know what? That's a convert now. Now he understands the importance of communication, coordination, and control. He's going to look to door control as his primary tactic, not just something, down the road if things start to go bad. And, Vinny Dunn was speaking to John Ceriello early on in this when the FDNY started formalizing its tactics and procedures. And he said, you have to make it within your own department testable material. So people are really going to look at it and study for it for promotion. And you got to figure it's going to be a 10-year process. And there are going to be those couple of people that never become believers. The fact of the matter is, I think there's more people in our church than the other church.
Doesn't have to be religious. I know that certainly high-rise ventilation is one of those topics that is near and dear to FDNY, and one that we looked at, and one that I think we learned a lot about. And I think I'm sure, John, you've been attacked on a number of occasions when it has to do with venting bulkheads and things like that. And I think that's one of those hard scenarios to gain experience on, because you're talking about potentially a door to the front of a building 20 floors away from where that fire is having an impact on what's going on that fire floor, or the same time a door 20 floors above where that fire floor is that could have an impact on the fire floor. And the understanding of, well, if you get the stairwell door and you control the stairwell door, maybe you don't have to worry about controlling the bulkhead. You get the fire apartment door and you're controlling the fire apartment door. Now it's not about the bulkhead anymore. And I think many people say, well, it's don't vent the bulkhead no matter what. It's like, that's not the message at all. It's connecting where that fire is, where it's getting its air, and you can control it from either end. You can control it from the inlet end, or you can control it from the outlet end. We saw that in Chicago. It's like, man, we can't get air into this fire floor. And it's like, well, that's because we're not letting hot gases out the top, so it can't pull air in. and it became a real easy, manageable fire. And the closer the door that you control, closer to the fire, the less you need to worry about what's going on in that stairwell, because you've already isolated at a different location. So I think that's, I mean, John, how many conversations have you had on that topic?
More than I care to recall. but what I will say is, again, kind of what I spoke about before, was when you start to develop this informational foundation of understanding pressures and understanding stack effect. Stack effect has been around in our books for 50 or 60 years. Our former members have had a great deal of information and understanding of that. And yet I'll hear firemen today say, oh, come on, what's the chance of that happening? No, we know it happens. That's not, that's true science that we kind of wrapped our brain around years ago, but now we have more information to flush it out. So again, the thinking firefighter, there'll be some fires maybe in upper portions of the building where that bulkhead's going to have a great effect of pulling that fire into the stairwell. But then when that fire is on the lower portions of the floor, if you open that bulkhead, it may not do anything because that the hot gases never make it up the interior stairs. My point being, when you have more information, you're going to make decisions based upon what's presented to you. And at times you're going to have controlling that bulkhead. Other times you're not controlling the bulkhead. But in the end of the game, door control as you move along in that fire scenario is always going to be a good thing, because you're controlling those flow paths of those unrestricted changes in pressures, as well as controlling smoke. We had a fire in December where we had a fire on the lower floor of a high-rise building. The members on the fire floor chose, for whatever reason, human factor or not understanding their SOPs, they never controlled the stairwell door. We had smoke throughout a 30-some-odd story building, to the point where we had I believe we had somewhere around 40 people overcome with smoke in different portions of the building. One 7-year-old little girl, they were performing CPR on the 22nd floor on her. Thank God she survived, and it all worked out. But the knowledge of the research allows us to make better decisions on the fire ground for us to operate and for the civilians.
Yeah, Steve, I want to jump in right there. So similar scenario to John, we had a 10-story hotel fire. You've actually seen the hotel. And, it's a legendary fire in our department. Oh, we had 43 civilian rescues. But the fact is the fire was on floor 2 and extended to floor 3. And we trapped those 43 civilians because we didn't control the stairwells. They filled with smoke and they couldn't evacuate. There really wasn't any danger. We got the fire extinguished, but they were in danger from the smoke and trapped on the upper floors. So we had to get ladder trucks in place for pulling people off of floor 10, and it was a nightmare. I mean, it took hours to get everybody fully evacuated from the building. So we implemented the smoke curtains, and hopefully, they're being used on these multi-story building fires, and we're getting them in place to try to control the stairwells and keep the smoke out of the stairwells.
Yeah, no, that's a huge lesson learned, and we also get the question, when are you going to research the smoke curtains and stuff like that? And my opinion of them is that, well, we research door control, we research limiting the air and or the exhaust. That is a tool to accomplish that. So if that's a tool that your fire department feels that they can implement well, you understand the science around it as to why it does what it does because of the research that's already happened. Doing more on that same exact topic is maybe there's some subtleties that could use some looking at, but I do think there's a lot of great success stories using tools like that, or using the door, whatever the case is. And
it's not a complicated device.
It isn't. Right. And I mean, it's very, very smart, and it gets used quite a bit internationally from what I've seen. The gentleman out of Germany that created it, and he's been on a mission to pass that knowledge around. And the fact that Cobb has them in their arsenal, and I'm sure you have all kinds of conversations about when would we implement that tool. Would we do it on a common stairwell structure versus a single family front door? I'm sure there's all kinds of SOPs that you've had to develop or training you've had to implement, because you don't just take those tools and throw them out into the street and expect them to be used right. So how did you guys go about that?
Yeah, so we really started with the multi-story building fire, and we put them down in all of our high-rise areas. And they started there, and then they started to spread and become more popular. Some of the guys just on their own started, asking me, hey, what about controlling the flow path? And could we use this at the front door on a residential building fire and that kind of stuff? And, there really isn't a lot of research out there on that, but so far we've had some success. I mean, guys are starting to at least think of it as a tool. Somebody just sent me a picture the other night from a commercial building fire, and they went to the rear, they forced the rear door. It had some pretty heavy slide bolts in it. So by the time they forced it, the door was no longer able to control. Well, that door was into the fire compartment, and they still wanted to control it because the fire hadn't been fully extinguished. So that truck company just grabbed the curtain and popped that curtain up because the door basically came off the hinges and was so damaged they couldn't control the door anymore. I'm like, hey, that's a perfect example of, using your tool to at least control and stop giving the fire more air.
Sean, this is a great topic, because one of the things that I think is that too many times we write an SOP and it goes up there on the shelf. Our SOP should be living documents, because our modern work environment constantly changes. And that's the importance of the research. We can use that research to understand the changes in our modern work environment. And then, yes, they have the pretty Sean up on the screen as we speak, but we can utilize the research to implement the changes to this living document that we use as an SOP. We have to be able to evolve. Like I said, we started getting lightweight truss construction engineered I-joists into the work environment. That seemed to surprise some people that it failed so early. Coming down the future, what about 3D printed homes, bioplastic homes, or tall wood buildings? What are the next furnishings, as Dan did in his recent study, seeing rigid polystyrene foam as the structural components of furniture? What does that do to the fuel load? Again, these are all things that we are researching that we can start to incorporate into that living document we call an SOP or SOG.
Absolutely. All right, we got a few minutes left. Let's go across the board real quick, and if you could give one message to a firefighter that's just kind of taking a look at the research, where would you tell them to start? How would you suggest to influence their department? Let's go with the guy that's landing helicopters or flying helicopters on the end there, JC.
What's the traffic report?
You're muted, pal. You got to unmute yourself.
George, help him out.
Push the giant
There
button.
you go. I got it. So, Steve, I recently went on your reconfigured website. It's phenomenal. You start there. As you had mentioned before, I've used a number of the UL Fire Safety Research Institute's 30, I'll make my own drill, 30-minute drill. I just go to tactical considerations and just pop it up, and I'll go through a handful of them. Maybe we get a run, maybe we don't get a run, but I think you have to start there. Start from number one or whatever. I know you don't have them numbered, but you know what I mean? Start with the most basic and work your way through it, and take your time. You can do this at work or at home. I know there's plenty of people that love to search the web for all kinds of stuff. There's no reason why firefighters can't be researching stuff at home, and I think you have the perfect platform to do that. Really, really good job. It looks fantastic. It's much easier to navigate through. Good job.
Thanks.
Start there.
George.
Yeah, let me just unmute myself. My colleague. You know what? I would challenge the young people. We wear our department shirts with pride. We buy shirts when we lose a brother or sister firefighter to support their families. We say we never forget. Read those NIOSH reports. See how many of those NIOSH reports talk about things like ventilation, the coordination of ventilation, what precipitated flashover. I don't read too many NIOSH reports that talk about pushing fire. Unfortunately, we're learning these hard-earned lessons on the streets, and no one's going to fires every day anymore. This research provides a vital link to add to our experience. Our experience can happen on the fire ground, absolutely. This research is vital in what we do. And if we want to wear those shirts, we want to say we never forget, learn those lessons, learn those stories. Don't let those tragedies play out again in another department. It's unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree. And I think that the line of duty deaths are certainly the tip of the iceberg with many contributing factors. And I know many of you have had the opportunity to work with NIOSH on some of those investigations and put those pieces together to learn from them and pass that learning on. I mean, I would just add that it's not just about that. And I feel like if we can get those obvious scenarios understood and learned from, I also think it goes all the way down to every action of every firefighter on any fire ground across the country. That if you take the research to understand the outcomes of every single thing you do, then you're going to be more efficient. You're going to be more effective. I mean, we're getting to the point now where that some of our studies, we're looking at the subtleties of search and rescue, of if I bring a victim out this way versus bringing a victim out that way, what gives them the best chance? And we're looking at the dosage of gases and heat that they get to try and make ourselves as efficient as possible. And it's not just about who died, injuries. They're underdocumented. There's plenty of them. It'd be great if we had a better handle on that, because that could drive the research as well. But I really think we need to focus on effectiveness and efficiency when it comes to the victims and everyday fire grounds versus the one complex incident. Because I think all of the incidents across the country will have pieces that are part of those line of duty death incidents that maybe enough pieces didn't come together, but they were still there. All right, I'm done preaching. Pete, you're up.
Okay, I'll preach. I'll be real fast. So if you're going to start somewhere, start with door control and start with ventilation. Educate yourself, come to an understanding that ventilation is a two-way street. It's not just the gases you're letting out, it's the air you're letting in. And if you don't understand both of those pieces of it, you're going to over-ventilate your fires. You're going to do it inappropriately. So I think that's the best place to start. End of rant.
Big Sean.
Yeah, to echo what's already been said, not me too, but educate yourself. Start with yourself and educate yourself on the research. It's easy to go through. It's very informative. And then start the discussion with the level above you. If you're a firefighter, start that discussion with your officers. If you're an officer, with your battalion chief and so up. But ask questions about each incident, right? And have some thought in your mind of what your answer would be. Be respectful, but start those discussions. Get those discussions moving forward. But it starts with yourself.
Young Sean, what do you know about discussions on the internet?
Oh gosh. Well, I was going to say, some of the rants that are out there it's about them. It's about the civilians. With this firefighter safety stuff, we're worrying too much about ourselves. We really need to worry about them. And my banter back to that is, if you're truly worried about them, then get out and deliver the close your door message in your community, because that's where we're going to start saving lives. We should start teaching company officers to start closing front doors as soon as they get up. Before they do a walk around, they should be going to the front door and closing the front door, or at least that initial guy stretching the line, getting to the door should be closing the door. So going back to where Pete was talking about controlling the ventilation, that's huge. And really trying to get that message out, with the implementation piece is something we did with our dispatchers. Our dispatchers are telling people when they call in from a structure fire to close their door after they've exited. That right there is huge, because we know that it's reducing temperatures. We know that it's reducing the gases. And if it is truly about them, then get out there to your community and be part of that.
Well, and thanks for teeing that up. I mean, I just want to close with just a little update. I mean, you can go to our website and see every single thing that we have going right now. But we're getting ready to ramp up the next phase of the Close Your Door campaign. And that's going to come out. And like Sean said, part of our goal there is to leverage the experience of the fire service. That the fire service's connection to public education is not what it should be. And if tactically, it's a tactic that you would use during vent enter isolate search and closing bedroom doors. Why would you not want the occupants to be closing their bedroom doors before you get there, to give themselves the best chance of survival and being rescued? So there's that component on the public education side. We've got fire cares and NFORS that we're participating in, and really interesting use of data. Your fire department be more effective and efficient. Everything from essentially taking the data right off the CAD to understanding response times, water on fire times, to get to some of these efficiency things that we can actually begin to understand and record. The fire attack project is coming to an end. We've got our final technical panel meeting next week. They've got a draft of the 3 reports that they're providing feedback. Can't thank them enough for taking such a complex issue and a very contentious issue and trying to take it back to the science, figure out what we're learning, figure out what those tactical considerations should be. So they're helping us with that wording, making sure that they're put in the proper context, make sure that the proper limitations and languages is on them so that they're used properly and not implemented incorrectly. So that'll be coming out by the end of October. We've got our training fires project, which is really in full swing. You might see some social media posts from us that show the different containers that we're looking at metal wall training facilities, concrete training facilities. How does that compare to gypsum board that you're going to come across in the street? How can we get a little more fidelity in our training without sacrificing safety and exposure and all kinds of other things? The next series for that project is really going to start to take the genius that is the fire service and all the innovative things that are going on around the country and start to put some research behind them so that they can be shared with the masses and understood of how to be implemented appropriately and safely. So looking forward to that. We've got a panel that's guiding that. The coordinated fire attack study builds on all of this, and we just selected the technical panel for that. You can go to our website and look at who those folks are. A great spread of folks across the country that, I couldn't be more proud to get, in excess of 200 applications for people to volunteer their time to participate in that study, to make sure that what does come out of it is as useful to the fire service as possible. Amazing, very hard to pick the folks for that panel out of such a large number of qualified folks. What else do we have going on? We've got the an Explore Labs module coming out, explorelabs.org, that's going to focus on fire investigation for middle school students. So if you've got a middle school student, this is a really cool science, technology, engineering, and math online interactive module that uses fire dynamics as its backbone, which is kind of cool. That's coming out of the NIJ project, where we're looking at burn patterns and the impact of ventilation on burn patterns. Because again, if it's important to the fire service, it's also important to the investigators to put the pieces together after the fact so that we can get good data about where fires are starting and why, to really influence our public education. So no shortage of stuff going on. And I can't thank you guys enough for, one, always being available and being on our advisory board and keep us going in the right direction, to be our boots on the ground and out there discussing the research and what it is and what it isn't. And I emphasize to anyone out there that if you want a good class at your department, any one of these guys would be a tremendous person to bring in to discuss what's really going on. And I know they're all very approachable. Reach out to any one of them individually and ask some questions. If you're in a department that's like one of their departments, talk to them. And we can get to a point where a lot of this stuff is well understood. And finally, we mentioned the website, Facebook and Twitter. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We're trying to put stuff out there every day to keep the transparency as open as possible, as well as the dialogue as open as possible. And if you want to reach us through there, and we'll certainly relay messages to these guys if you want to ask them questions as well. So at UL_FSRI, or on Facebook, search UL Firefighter Safety and we'll pop up. So thanks to everybody out there. And we'll see you the next 5th Wednesday on the Google Hangout, which I believe is November or something like that. And I think
29th, I think you said.
Yeah, perfect. So that's our next one. To everybody out there, thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Steve. Be well.
Bye, Steve. Ciao.
Thanks all.